Hello and welcome to the Intellects Co. I'm Colin Fairley. I'm a pragmatist philosopher and political theorist based at Queen's University in Canada. And in this video, I'm going to be unpacking a little bit more detail in Chapter 2 of my book, Aging and the Ethics of Longevity Science, published with Oxford University Press. So this is the second installment of 3 videos on Chapter 2. I already posted The Aging of Humanity, which was the first video on Chapter 2, putting aging on the radar. And the healthspan concept now will follow up from that first video on the aging of humanity. And then the video that will follow after this is on the 3 major disputes that make rate of aging control both a feasible but also morally laudable aspiration for medical science in the 21st century. This video will not be particularly long. I'm just going to unpack a little bit of the issues that arise with respect to the concept of healthspan and how it's distinct from lifespan. So when we talk about the lifespan of a species, and for humans and for a particular person, we're talking about how many years we live. And that's distinct from the healthspan, which is how many years lived in good health. So the article that I rely on throughout the book is this JAMA Network piece on the disparity, the growing disparity between healthspan and lifespan. Globally in the world, it's about 9.6 years, meaning that human populations are surviving nearly a decade beyond the period of reasonably good health, free from the diseases, disability, and frailty associated with more advanced ages. And this gap is larger for women by nearly 2.5 years. So the distinction between lifespan and healthspan is really critical for how we conceptualize what longevity science should be doing. And I'm going to unpack the 2 distinct forms of longevity science, the first of which focuses on trying to maximize the lifespan, and the other which focuses on trying to increase the healthspan. So the 2 approaches to longevity science that I address in the book are suited for distinct types of challenges. In the past, the number 1 priority for the steamship of modern public health was to abate the high rates of early life mortality from infectious disease and poverty. And this is still a major public health hurdle for the poorest regions of the world. But globally, life expectancy at birth now surpasses age 73. It's projected to rise to age 81 by the end of the century. And so that opens the door to a novel predicament for public health in the 21st century. And that is represented by the iceberg on the front cover of the book, which represents biological aging, which limits further increases not only in life expectancy, but more importantly, in healthy life expectancy. And so I'll unpack these 2 different approaches to longevity science, and the healthspan concept is really critical to this second conception, the one that's much more critical to the future of public health. The first approach to longevity science can be defined as the following. It's to increase the duration of survival time for a population by medical and public health interventions designed to prevent, treat, and eliminate specific diseases and other causes of premature mortality like accidents. Right, so this is the ideal of disease control, articulated by Winslow in his article, his 1903 article, The War Against Disease. And this is baked into the way we conceptualize what the goals of medical science are, right? We say that vaccinations, for example, save lives, or reducing fatality in traffic accidents as saving lives. And so that first articulation, the first ideal of longevity science was conceived about saving lives and prolonging the lifespan. Now, the second way of conceptualizing longevity science, advocated by geril scientists in the middle of the 20th century, in particular Willard Thompson and Alex Comfort, was to actually propose targeting biological aging itself. to increase the health span. So the ideal of rate control maintains that we should increase the duration of healthy life for a population by slowing the rate of biological aging, thereby fortifying biological resilience to disease, frailty, and disability across the lifespan, but especially in older ages. And this is the ideal of rate control. And so I have a target on that iceberg because now the second ideal focuses specifically on how we might be able to modulate the mechanisms of biological aging to increase health span and hopefully compress the period of life where we manage multi-morbidity. Now, the health span concept is critical here, and let me just say a few words about explaining exactly what it is. In the book, I recognize that the health span concept has great value, but it also has limits. And so I try to be forthright about both its benefits and its drawbacks. In terms of its benefits, the idea of the health span really helps to refine a distinct ideal for medical science from the goal of preventing premature death, which has been the aspiration of Winslow's war against disease. So unlike the goal of saving the young from premature death, which is morally laudable and still an important imperative to pursue, we can't relax our aspirations in trying to reduce these mortality risks. But the second ideal of rate control draws our attention to the moral imperative to improve quality of life across the lifespan by increasing the health span and compressing disease, frailty, and disability in late life. So the critical thing to recognize is that pursuing disease control has not yielded the aspirations of rate control. That is, saving people from premature death does not alter the rate of biological aging to increase health span and compress disease, frailty, and disability in late life. And so we're going to actually have to target intentionally the rate of biological aging to achieve this aspiration of living to of having more health in the advanced stages of the human lifespan. In terms of defining the health span concept and its limitations, I want to rely on a great piece by Matt Kaeberlein, who's an outstanding neuroscientist who's done a lot of important work in this area. And we can define it broadly as the period of lifespan in good health, free from the chronic diseases and disabilities of aging. And really, as he points out in his piece, how healthy is the health span concept? It's a conceptual construct rather than an empirical reality. So let me just illustrate that by drawing our attention to the health risks that face two different age cohorts. So imagine you have one age cohort of children in Canada from ages 5 to 25, right? So children and adolescents and young adults. And we say how many out of 100 Canadians between ages 5 and 25, how many of them are going to die in the next 5 years? How many of them are likely to get cancer, Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, and stroke? It's going to be very low risk. It's not to say, of course, some of them will die. There are accidents, which is the leading cause of death for Canadians in this age cohort. There are childhood forms of cancer, though much more rare compared to the prevalence of cancer in older ages. Right? So compare that to the average Canadian over the age of 80. Right? So over the age of 80, you're going to see much higher rates of heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, and dementia. And if we ask, well, why is it the case that, Canadians younger than age 25 have such low health risks with respect to these chronic conditions, and yet Canadians over age 80 have such a high risk of these, not just one of these conditions, but actually multi-morbidity. This reflects the declining force of evolution by natural selection, right? What is referred to as the disposable soma theory of aging, that evolution prioritizes health during the reproductive lifespan, but not in the stages of life where we're historically unlikely to be alive. So Canadians under age 25, on the whole, are living within the human health span. So we see them having a very high level of biological resilience to heart disease, cancer, stroke, and Alzheimer's. Whereas Canadians over age 80, on average, are much more susceptible to these chronic conditions. And that is because there has been a diminishment of their biological resilience to the onset of these chronic conditions in late life. Now, the concept, while it has great value in communicating how translational gerontology is a distinct ideal from the ideal of eliminating specific diseases, it does have drawbacks, and I want to emphasize some of those here. Again, drawing on the Kaverline piece in geroscience. So the first is that there's going to be variation in any medical condition and for particular people. So take something like arthritis, for example, of which there are many variants, but you might have the same variant of arthritis that impacts people in different ways, depending on their lifestyle and habits. Secondly, there's no sudden transition from health span to the post-health span stage of life, right? This is a gradual process. Conditions worsen over time. It's not like we wake up one day and you say, oh no, I've expired, my health span is expired, and now, there's the onset of multi-morbidity. You will have perhaps early indications of particular problems, and then those things may get exacerbated over time. All right. So as a construct, we talk about, how long the gap between health span and lifespan is, but in practice, it's for an individual person a much more complicated issue. For many conditions, the trajectory might not be linear, meaning it's a constant decline of health. There could be periods where a new medication actually helps to abate some of the adverse effects of the condition. And for a number of years, then there's an improvement. And then that improvement diminishes and a new therapeutic is pursued that then has some positive benefit. And so many of the conditions that we are vulnerable to as we get older kind of goes like the economy. It has its peaks and troughs in terms, but the long-term trajectory will be a decline given the nature of biological aging and the limitations of each of the interventions we have to try to abate the adverse health effects of biological aging. All right, so that is it for this second video on putting aging on the radar, the health span concept. It was not a very lengthy video. The third and final video for chapter 2 is the 3 major scientific disputes, and that is going to canvass the amazing scientific discoveries made through the 20th century that have made it possible for us to pursue rate control as a feasible and morally laudable aspiration for medical science in the 21st century.